going to be a list of North American cities from now on for a while. And we have Washington, D.C. So if you are just joining now on the invite of Washington, D.C.'s event, this is 24 hours of UX. So welcome. Normally, I would have my partner, Jesse Anton, here by my side. He's been pushing it hard for close to, for 18, 19 hours. So he did have to take a nap. He's just human after all. I did that before him. So, and just like we are passing the baton from one of us to the other during the facilitation of this event, we're also the other organizers of this event passing the baton, because the idea originated with Jesse and myself in Geneva, Switzerland. But by all means, we're not the only organizers, because there are 20 other groups who have been organizing their 1 hour within these 24 hours. And there's also 8 keynote speakers who we have already had. And although all the keynote speakers are behind us, there are still some very interesting talks. And then we have Jody Thomas from the Washington team, who I am adding, and then Jim. But basically what will happen, that worked. What will happen now is the Washington team will, of course, introduce themselves, and this hour is theirs. I wanted to thank also our sponsors who are enabling this event, Adobe XD, and also UXtesting.io. They have been incredible help, not only because of monetary sponsorship, but also connecting us with some of the groups who have been able to collaborate with. And that is all for me at this point. So over to you, Washington, and I will be around to help with technical questions or anything around. So,
thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Peter. Excellent. Hello, everyone. Greetings from Northern Virginia and Washington, D.C. My name is Jim Lane, and I'm joined tonight by Jody Thomas and Alex Shao. And we are co-organizers of a group called Nova UX that was founded back in 2012. And this is a particularly special evening for us. Not only are we participating in 24 hours of UX, but we're also celebrating our group's 8th birthday and 100th event. So we're excited that all of you could join us this evening. If this is the first talk you've joined, welcome to 24 Hours of UX. Please stick around for more talks here on the main stage. After our talk this evening, we will be going to our breakout room and taking some additional questions. So tonight, I will be moderating. We're going to be talking about establishing UX teams and growing UX designers. Alex and Jody are going to be joining me for the conversation, and we're hoping to take lots of questions. So Alex and Jody are going to be keeping an eye on questions posted in chat, and we're gonna see how that goes. So this is a new format for us. So I guess to start things off, guys, 8 years, 100 events. Hopefully a lot of Nova UXers are joining us here on the platform this evening. I'm glad you guys could join tonight. So how about, actually, let's start with this question. So it's been a ton of events. What are some highlights you guys, been 8 years? What are some things that stick out in your minds?
I'll go first. Jody? Yeah, cool. Well, I remember when this first started about 8 years ago, so disclaimer: Jody and Jim and us three used to all work together long way back in the heydays of AOL. We can get to that if you guys want to ask questions about it. But when Jim mentioned that he was going to start a UX event, and at the time there was a ton of them in Washington D.C. and they were great, fantastic. But for folks that were further out west, 20 minutes out west, not that far from DC, but as for folks that live in the DC area, as you can imagine, in a metropolitan city, driving in and out of city out of rush hours could be pretty cumbersome. So Jim mentioned he was going to start an UX event, specifically in Northern Virginia, in Tyson's Corner. I'm like, this is fantastic. Like, happy to support, love to be there. And he's like, I got the first one. It's going to be in McLean. Like, I'd love to have you attend. I'm like, say no more, I'll be there. So I remember showing up. It was this old building in McLean, and McLean's great, but it's an old office building. And I guess the space probably no bigger than I don't know, a broom closet. And
Right.
it was an awesome little machine and a little awesome eye tracking device. It was a mechanical eye tracking device. It was sitting on top of this old rickety monitor. And we start talking about eye tracking and hotspots and areas of consternation of really understanding of users who are going through a website. And I just remember, because it's such a small space, the eye tracking device was making these creaky noises, like as it was making this like crazy mechanical sound. I'm like, this is awesome. And to see how that have propelled, not just from eye tracking technology, but also 8 years later, we're now hosting our 100th event. Kudos to Jim and Jody, and also here talking to everyone globally. So really excited to be here.
Yeah. And while we're at it, we should give a shout out to two organizers who were involved with the group, Will King and Kit Unger, who couldn't join us this evening. Kit's out on the West Coast these days at Smartsheet, and Will's here in the DC area. Big thanks to them as well, because they played a big part of getting us here. Jody, how about you? What sticks out in your head? Then we'll get to talking about designers and teams.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this. There's a recent meetup that we did on design systems, and Hannah White from a company called Leverage, they're an IoT company, talked about building this themable, skinnable design system. But the thing that stuck out to me most about her talk was the collaboration that really happened between the development team and the design team, and how they both sort of came together and met in the middle to that handoff moment that can always be a little bit tricky and things sort of get missed. And they built systems to make things much more seamless between their two teams. So that one was just sort of this moment where, like, even the amazingness that she and her team built, there still could have been that delta that and how they really integrated. They built like APIs that synced tokens between Figma and their design system seamlessly, no matter where you updated them, whether it was in Figma or whether it was in within the code. So that one just sort of struck me in terms of the way that they were able to manage that. And another one that I was thinking about, and I don't even remember the exact topic, but David Panarelli a couple of years ago was presenting, and he was talking, he was a freelancer. He was talking, I think, mainly about getting into, building his freelance business. And he got hired to do, I think it was like a research project, and he had no idea how to do it. And he just talked about cramming it and sort of faking it till you make it, leveraging your network and being able to take that project on, even though he didn't necessarily have that expertise going into it.
That's great. That's great. I'm going to take the easy route and say I remember and miss the cake. So every year for our birthday for 8 years, we always got this big old cake we would celebrate each year. And unfortunately, obviously, because we're all remote, we can't do that this year. But we wish you all a virtual cake. Cheers and scotch. So let's talk about building UX teams and coaching and growing designers. So let's start with teams, because we've all worked with teams and built out teams. Sometimes you inherit a team, sometimes you get to build out a team from scratch. How have you guys approached that problem? Is there an example that comes to mind where you did that?
I mean, I'll go ahead, Alex. I think the biggest thing for me is understanding, if you're coming in and you have a team and you may be augmenting and growing the team, or it might just be that's the size of your team, is understanding each person on your team, what their skill set, their working styles, where they're trying to grow, areas they don't want to grow, and thinking about how can you sort of complement that overall team structure. Just getting to know each team member on a personal level, as well as, their craft, I just think is really important. Otherwise, you don't really understand the foundation that you're starting with.
Yeah, it's true. That's true. Alex, so you've got a pretty large organization these days. How do you think about, as you're looking at the org that exists, how do you think about, does it grow? Does it change? How do you approach that structurally, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think if you look across any organizations, teams, you got to treat it as a living, breathing organism. and it's always going to be augmented. It's always going to be changing based on a number of factors, from organizational shifts, alignments, strategic directions, and more importantly, things happen, right? And many things have been happening for us in the last 6 months, for all of us. So I think if you put that as part of how you think about how you build teams, a growth of teams, treat it as such that it's always evolving. And I think more importantly, as an underpinning sort of approach, is always treat it with culture as being the first and foremost. And I think all of us have heard about culture. I think what we could do is probably unpack that a little bit more in terms of what that really means as to how we instill that. There's a lot of sort of things that we could take into consideration to make that happen and make that an approachable, palatable approach, because it doesn't just start from one individual. It starts from everybody. And I think that's a key component as you start thinking about how to evolve, how to grow a team in sort of a scale level.
Excellent. And we're already getting a couple of questions. And Brian Sullivan's asked a couple. And he just asked one, and I'll take a swing. I'll take a quick swing at that one. It wasn't a large organization. A job ago, I joined a startup in DC. And it was a unique opportunity. They had nothing. There was no UX practice, no designers, and it was just an opportunity to come in and just start from scratch. And to answer your question, I approached it with in a couple different ways. I wanted to start with some core principles of what design and experience meant at that company. It was a privacy and data security company, which there's some very specific things that come along for that ride. So kind of starting with the bedrock of what do we care about? What do we want to be about? What does design mean for us? And then what's the needs of the organization? When I looked at what kind of structure did the organization need, what products already existed, where were there areas of practice that needed designers, and how senior did they need to be? How autonomous did each of the teams need to be? Did we want to start thinking about a design system? When is the right time to start thinking about a design system? That's a big investment to make, and it's an important one, but it's a non-trivial one to make. Start to think about some research. What kind of research can we do? How scrappy can we be? And then the last two things that I'll mention when you're starting out kind of from nothing is, how are you going to measure the ROI of design? Like, how do we actually know that the design that we're doing is impactful, and tie that back to business objectives? And then the last thing I'll mention is evangelism. So how do you be the voice for design, be the voice for the users, and really represent user-centered design as a practice when it hasn't existed before? And so helping the organization understand, like, what does that mean, and how do we do that, and how do we know we're successful? So that's how I would, in a very long-winded way, answer Brian's question. And for others watching us, we're going to keep an eye on questions. If you guys have questions for us, we're happy to just answer lots of questions too. But if not, I will wing difficult questions.
And Jim, this is the voice of Peter.
Yes, Peter.
Can you just read up the questions, because some people might not be knowing which question you're referring to and all that.
Fantastic. That's a great point. Peter, Brian's question was, how do you scale a new design practice at a large organization?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah,
and maybe for those who don't know you or don't know you from Nova, can you also just say one sentence about each of you, so people who don't know who they are seeing?
Thank you, Peter, for the voice behind the Iron Curtain.
I'm now disappearing.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. That was perfect. Thank you, Peter.
Fantastic. Yeah, let's do it. Yeah. It's bad on me for not doing introductions. Jody, you want to go first?
Sure. I am Jody Thomas. I'm one of the co-organizers of Nova UX, and I currently lead a team at PowerSchool, which is an educational technology company.
Excellent. Alex.
Yep. Alex Xiao, in the field for roughly about 20 years in product design UX. Got my heyday start of AOL and post that about 6 years in. For the last 14 years, have had the really fortunate circumstances of working with some pretty amazing brands and companies at many various different capacity, as a consultant, as an agency partner, as a startup founder, as a consultant, or in-house designer, and working with various different teams ranging from product startups like Netflix, Intuit, rising innovation startups, stealth startups, and a whole wide range. I think one of the key things that have been really, really interesting is to see how design and products has evolved and allowing design to have a seat at the table in such a more sort of dynamic, more meaningful way, in which we'll certainly get into. I currently run two things. One, I run an amazing team of product designers at CNN Digital in the Emerging Products and Platforms group, which Jim can speak a little more to. That encompasses the portfolios of companies, if you will, in the politics, business, and new news of space, if you will. And as well as what we consider as more as an accelerated type format, where we're looking at different verticals to see what we could do to accelerate some product opportunities from a D2C standpoint. So it's been an amazing ride working with some tremendous team and as well as scaling and growing the team. We'll continue to grow. So certainly love to hear from you if you have any interest in participating and working with us. And Jim, take it away.
So my name is Jim Lane. I'm currently the creative director for CNN Politics, part of Alex's org. We all worked together, as we mentioned, years ago at AOL, and since then have worked at other large companies and small startups, like AdThis, Revolution Health, Virtrue, which I was just talking about a moment ago in DC. And 8 years ago founded this group, and people sometimes say to me, like, what's the favorite part of your career, the best job or whatever? And it's easy answer. It's always been Nova UX. Just to get to know so many designers, young designers, more experienced designers, product people, startup folks, has been an incredible privilege for 8 years. So, which has been fantastic. So, without further ado, with that little detour, thank you, Peter, for the reminder. I would have kicked myself later if we had actually completely forgotten to do that. Let's get back to talking about starting up teams. Do we want to grab a question out of chat, guys, or do we want to keep?
Yeah, let's do that. Nathan Curtis got a question. Hey, Nathan. Good to see you, man.
Yeah, good to see you, Nathan.
Yep. So how do you know, this is Nathan's question, how do you know when and how fast to shift from learning to doing and changing when coming into leading a new team? Great question.
It's a great question. Who wants to run with that one?
I'll take a start. Hi, Nathan. I think part of it is understanding the organization. So part of it is sitting down and having those one-on-ones with different groups in the org. A lot of times I've found that those higher than you want that change to happen really fast. Those that are maybe your peers or will be your direct reports may be more uncomfortable with some of the changes that they may be feeling like are going to happen. So first you have to sort of, I like to time box how long that time is going to be based on a little bit of feeling out those around me. And that might be 30 days, that might be 60 days, it might be 90 days, it might be 6 months if you're coming into a really large enterprise organization. But you need to take the time to learn across the organization, not just maybe within your silo, but all of the ones that your teams may touch. And you need to be able to approach it like a research project, I think, and really start to pull anything out that you're feeling, start to synthesize those themes. And also, I think in terms of starting to make that change, really create some goals and objectives around which things are going to have the most impact based on what you're hearing across the org. So there might be something really important that is going to take 2 years, and that might be something that I might decide to focus on something shorter term in the meantime.
Yep. There's a terrific book called The First 90 Days, which isn't specifically about design, but it's a great way of thinking about when you come into an organization, what's your learning plan? What does success look like? What is the business trying to accomplish? What's the role of design in that? How mature is design? And it gets to that, like, what's the time frame in which you really want to demonstrate some success, some traction in the organization and build relationships and stuff like that. It's a great book. If you have a chance to check it out, it's good. How about another one?
Brian is mentioning, how do you prevent siloing between engineering, design, and business strategy as your design team grows larger and larger?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I'll say at smaller companies, one of the things we've done is, let me let my dog in here 1 second. I've got a hound. What's in the room? Hey, buddy. The one thing we did at a startup was we literally have them sit together, like when we were all in an office, right? Of this idea of like having designers sit with teams.
Hey, Jim, real quick. You want to give your quick bio of the different startups and product and companies you've worked with?
Oh gosh. Startups like Add This, which got acquired by Oracle, Virtru, Contactually.
And Contactually got acquired by Compass.
It got acquired by Compass, yep. And Revolution Health, which is a Steve Case company that spun out of, that he started that, of those after AOL in DC. But a lot of us had the thing in common where when you have these teams sitting together, working together, or they're remote, sharing Slack channels, really promoting that collaboration instead of just handing things over the wall to each other. That's a great way to help them work together on shared objectives and shared OKRs. That's an important thing too, is the team as the OKR, not the individual.
Yeah, and to go back to Brian's question of siloing as the work gets bigger, I think the concerted effort is to think about how we approach products in a unified manner. And I think there's a lot of great books and workshops and consideration thinking around that. One of the things that we've been looking at very closely and thinking about the notion of discovery or approach towards a new product discovery and positioning. Much of it is some of that is kind of considering what some of the workshop that Marty Kagan and his group have done with SVPG, a Silicon Valley product group, and thinking about how we go about doing product discovery, in which he outlines, and I think it's very consistent with a lot of companies that many of you, I'm sure, are used to working with. And I think it goes in the same vein. Even if we go to larger organizations, each individual product teams can still instill that practice, which is around that constant double diamond discovery process. Where you have a consistent product person, technology person, and design person. And I say person loosely because those could be leads, those could be individual contributors, there could be a manager that's a player coach type that really gets involved in helping to understand the process of how we go about doing projects and product discovery in a more meaningful way. And that goes through that very iterative fashion to validate the assumptions that we're trying to create from a product and feature perspective. So that still works in a larger corporation. And we're starting to practice that, and that we're starting to see some pretty interesting success and also growing pains as well.
Yeah, it's true. That's true. And we could use Grace's question to kind of pivot to designers and professional growth and good stuff like that. So and I will say we get a question like this almost every month at Nova UX, which is I'm starting out as a UX designer. I don't have a lot of experience. How do I start? What do I do? What do you guys think?
Yeah, Grace's question is, what's your first step to take when starting one's career in UX design?
Yeah. Let's take it.
Well, so I'm going to assume that you've sort of already decided that UX is a career you want to pivot into. I think one of the things, if you're working in an industry where you can start to create UX projects, even if you're an accountant, right? You are a developer, you could be, any discipline. What are ways that you can start to have almost mini UX projects before you actually have a job title of UX designer? So you bring a lot of expertise in whatever role that you're currently in. It could be you're involved in some software that's being created, and maybe you're in that role as, like I said, as the accountant or the finance person coming into it. But how can you start to use that as how might you approach the project, and how can you start to be a little bit more involved? So I would always ask for feelers in your current position of, what are some of those projects that you can take on either side of desk or as an actual project? Because like I said, you've got a lot of knowledge and expertise in your current career already.
I saw Jacob Nielsen recently talking about a similar question, and he made a point that was really interesting. He said, when you're brand new and have no experience, there's usually two pieces of advice, right? Either make up a project like iTunes just ticks me off, and so I'm just going to redesign it and then explain how I redesigned it. He said, or you look for pro bono, right? I go out and find a church or an organization that needs some work, that needs some help, and offer to help them out, and I use that as my portfolio. And he said, it's great to take on the projects where you actually have a client, because then you're solving real problems, getting real feedback. He said the point I had never heard before, he said with researchers, it's the opposite. And he said, if you're a researcher and you're trying to, like, how do I start out? I don't have a job yet. How do I show I can do research? He said, well, you can make up your own research projects and do really, really interesting work. He said, if you go out and do research for free, it tends not to be valued because nobody paid for it. I thought that was really interesting. I'd never heard that point before. But there are some great resources out there. So if you're trying to transition into UX or are new to UX, there's some great strategies and folks out there. What's another one we can do?
Yeah, it's a quick follow-up to that too. I think tried and true, which is also mentioned. It looks like Peter's also followed up. There's a great event that's coming up in San Francisco that's going to talk exactly about this, which is great. But I think you're going to hear this as an echoing theme, which I will say it's easier to say, but it's also to listen in to say, yeah, I'm going to do that. But it's going to take a lot of discipline and practice to do it, which is consistently reaching out, just like you are doing now, asking these questions and network the heck out of network. Like, just do it. I think that's so important. It's the people relationship, the understanding of what's happening in the trends of the industry. It's a key component. It's the people you know. But more importantly, I think you're going to get a better sense in terms of the needs, the wants, and the desires from the companies, right? Or an organization that you're aspiring to join, or teams or people you want to work with. You'll have a better sense in terms of what they're looking for. So pay close attention, talk to people, listen to people, network with people. And I think you'll hear that, but I can't stress that enough. Yeah,
absolutely. What's that? Joe, do you want to grab a question for us?
Gosh, there's so many coming in.
Great. I'm going to scroll up here. Yeah.
So Omar is asking, from your perspective, who should be in charge of the product discovery process, design or product teams?
Ooh. Jim, you want to go for that?
Say the question again.
Who should be in charge of the product discovery process, design or product?
Yes. I think that the most effective and interesting product discovery process is a collaboration between design and product and engineering. In other words, it's a collaborative process where we're taking that journey together, and figuring out, like, what are the problems we want to solve, for who, what are the pain points, how do we come up with solutions we can actually test and prototype them as quickly as possible. When we can do that together, I think that's, it's much better than when a team's off in the corner trying to do it in a vacuum. So I would say false choice. I'd say as much as possible, try to do that kind of thing together. And by the way, everyone, there is a storm rolling through Northern Virginia, as Nathan Curtis is pointing out here too. Yeah. So we will see how this goes. With luck, everything will be fine. That's a great question. Thanks for asking that. What's another good one?
I'm going to scroll up and kind of catch up on some of the questions earlier. So Vladislav Glad had a question around how to communicate the value of UX design in early stage startups, and how does that compare differently from like startup to like a big company, for example, like CNN, or a more founded product company like a Schoology. And so that's Jody, you want to take that?
Gosh, I've been fortunate enough in the startups that I've worked for that.
One more. Jody used to work at Capital One, so really big.
Yeah, but I've been really fortunate. The startups I have worked at really valued design from the beginning. So I was fortunate that I didn't have to sort of prove the worth of design. If you've ever been through investor pitches and you have seen a deck that maybe a founder has made that you then redid and told the story a bit differently, and then watch that investor go in and land a new round of money, I think that's an immediate moment where they can sort of see the value of bringing a designer in to the process. I found that at larger companies, metrics, not that metrics aren't important at startups, but a lot of times at startups, you're sort of moving in a lot of different directions, trying to make sure you've got that product market fit. But at larger organizations, it's about how did this experience, increase deposits? How did it increase NPS? How, what is that metric that the business is really gauging how they're doing?
Yeah, definitely plus one on that.
I mean, what I'd add that I think in a startup world, a lot of the time the startup's trying to figure out their market fit. They're trying to figure out what their business strategy is. So they don't necessarily know what the most important metrics are. And so design can help explore those problems and explore possibilities, and then think about how we could help tie that to metrics. In big companies, you walk in, they already know, they've got their business plan, they got their metrics, they got their analytics, like Jody said. And so our job as designers is to make sure that our work ladders up to those business objectives. Yeah, that's a fantastic question.
Awesome question. And you guys both answered it. Perfect. Francis had a good question. In terms of sharing and contributing designs, is there a process or a polite way into gauging comfort zones of the other designers in the team you're collaborating with? So I think it's more around how to work with other designers, like you're collaborating with. Both of you guys answered the question earlier. I can take this one with Rick, and feel free to add. I think if you think about from design, I think it starts with the understanding as a team. I think that's the part, going back to the culture component, which was brought up, is to understand that we all have a shared common goal of creating a great experience. And that great experience is essentially serving for your audience, your users, your customers who are coming through. So I think that needs to be established right from day one, to understand that we're all working for that common goal. That will certainly help alleviate any egos. And hopefully you've done a good enough job hiring the right people to come in. And even then, designers, we're very proud in terms of the work we do, so totally understand. So I think if you establish that theme of, hey, we're all working towards a common goal, I think it's going to help establish a ground rule to understand how we work together. And more importantly, I think the polite way, so that speaks to process a little bit, which is around having founded sort of cadence or time to do crits and reviews. So I think those are opportune times so that people to understand that it's a safe space to provide constructive feedback, and use that as a way. And I think you can lead that providing examples of leveraging either your team or you yourself who's moderating the crit to speak to provide as an example how to provide a feedback that's constructive, right? So, and many of you I'm sure have heard this, rather than end with a but, lead with an end, right? And so it's not a negative, it's a positive aspect to say what you could do potentially to make the experience better. So I think it's a common thing that you find that has been pretty helpful in terms of now, at least at CNN, how we're integrating that working cadence. And then Jim has been leading some of those efforts, especially with the politics team. And I think that worked really, really well.
I think there's an interesting trade-off. The trade-off's not the right word. On the one hand, you want to create a safe space where we can provide feedback to each other and feel like we can be truthful with each other and so on. And at the same time, practice giving and receiving feedback. And it's constructive, right? Sometimes, there may not be a reason, there may be a reason why, hey, I don't think that works, given what you said was the objective of this. So I think as leaders, it's really important to help our teams practice that of how do you giving and receiving feedback, creating a space where everyone feels like they can challenge each other in a way that doesn't feel like you're being attacked, like you're being is huge. That's good. That's a great question.
And I'm going to add on to that, Jim, too. I love process, and this is an area that I think is an area that I've given designers a lot of process to give them freedom. So, for example, coming into a design review or a crit, everybody has to be on the same page of where along the process are we reviewing this work? What type of feedback is the designer looking for? Every designer that gives feedback has to give actionable feedback. So not just that blue isn't working, but what about that blue isn't working for the design? And if it's bringing teams from multiple areas within the organization together, it's always extremely helpful if it's very clear to everyone what their role is on the project. So if they're unclear on what their role is, that's when you start to get those friction points of, well, why didn't they make the changes that I asked for? And so if you need to, like, RACI is a great way to sort of focus folks in, and reminders that, maybe they're just somebody who's being consulted because this might eventually touch their product, but they don't need to be sort of in that responsible category of driving things forward.
Yeah, and I think that's a follow-up question from Jatin. He said, I'm a UX designer with almost 2 years of experience. I want to understand, what are some good ways to show the value of the work that you're doing, both within your team and in the organization? I'm assuming as a UX designer. So I think we've touched on some of that. Be contributive, showing understanding the ROI from a business organizational standpoint. If it's a startup, rapid iterations of highlighting tangible experiences, right? And hopefully you're validating with some hypothesis that you're helping to inform, right? By creating those experiences and prototypes. So there's many good ways that you can contribute in a way to show value in a small or big organization, or if you're a freelancer or you're independent, to show the value of UX overall.
And particularly if you're a freelancer, particularly, right? Yep. Because you're selling yourself and your skill set in addition to the work that you're doing, of like, hey, this is going to help your bottom line, which is super important. What's another good one?
V has a question.
All right.
Hello, V. As design leaders in companies of various sizes, how do you view product design roles that encompass the more full stack design process, from research to visual design and everything in between, versus more specific disciplines like UX researcher, UI design, visual designer, prototyper, creative technology, etc.? Great question.
I guess I'll take a swing at it since it's kind of my fault. Well, it's funny. I was reading something a while back that was making the point that company culture can be really heavily influenced by how teams are organized. And I think when you think about, how am I going to build a team? How am I going to structure a team? What kind of designers do I want to hire? It has a lot to do with how the organization's structured. Is design kind of in a service role where, years and years ago at AOL, there was a thing called the studio at AOL. So all the designers were part of the studio and they were all allocated to projects. But there was this kind of the studio over here. In a lot of companies now, you have product teams where designers are embedded in those teams and they're expected to kind of cover that design role. And so you have these kind of broader discipline designers who can partner really closely with that multifunctional team. And you have, sometimes there might still be some specialists like researchers, or maybe there's the designer on the marketing team doing much more visual design and assets and that kind of stuff. But the product designers are doing doing all the design for these various distributed teams. I think it depends a lot on how the company is organized, and how it wants to work. Would be my 2 cents.
Yeah, I definitely second that. I've seen across the board from companies to companies that function differently in terms of how they proceed with design, right? So at Netflix, they were just strictly product designers. Now, technologists and researchers were unique disciplines, because I think that still requires a very strong discipline and approach towards the work. When I say product designer in general, that encompasses more from a UX and UI perspective. And I think there's been a lot of consternation and conversations around the difference between those two. At Netflix, it wasn't separated. And I've seen that same pattern starting to happen across many startups, that's probably mostly out of necessity. And from what Jim and Jody was talking about, in terms of you talking about startup versus bigger companies, my approach is always looked at it as a T-shape. As a designer, you're looking across the board, so you do want to have a wide range of understanding of the discipline of UX. You could have a very strong discipline that can really help offset and really shine your strength and capability. And I think that's something as individuals, I think we all strive to do. Like, we could be generalists on certain things, but we're really great at something. And that's something you can take pride of.
Fantastic question. What's another good one we can tackle?
So I think somebody plussed one of Keith's questions. I'm going to guess which one it is. What portion of a practitioner's time on the payroll should be devoted to professional development versus getting the work done? How much professional development budget should each practitioner get?
Interesting.
I'll go ahead and start on.
Sure.
It depends, which feels like such a cop-out. The best thing is to always find and give credit to my old boss, Nathan, of making a project. If you're trying to grow a skill, make sure that they have a project that they can practice that skill. Mm-hmm. And so, I think that yes, you can take a course on the side or go to a conference, but how do you put that into practice? Because then that sort of can even out the I'm spending my time noodling over on the side versus actually putting that into, doing it for a project. The budget, gosh, that is just per company discretion. I mean, as a manager, I always try to build in a protected professional development budget, but that has varied from company to company. In terms of how it gets divvied, I like to divvy it up pretty evenly, but when there isn't a big enough pool to send everybody to a conference, then it becomes a little bit more creative some folks don't actually want to go to conferences. Right. They would rather do a course. Right. Some folks would, rather spend the money doing, going to that networking conference, and they're happy even if it's too much to pay for part of it out of pocket. So part of that is just getting a little creative. Yep. I don't know about you guys.
Yep.
Yeah, as an organization, we work very closely with HR and learning and development to make sure that our teams and team members are getting the necessary and also career growth development opportunities within the organization, but also as personal skill sets of development. So there's no set amount, and it varies from companies, and the percentage obviously also varies based on revenue, profits, and EBITDA and all that good stuff. With that said, though, I think it's certainly very important for us to think about that in a way to be mindful, to actually put aside a budget, put aside the time, to be mindful how we approach team learning, individual learning, and also given the current situation of our environment of potential virtual learning. So those are all the things, and certainly Jody's being in the education space can speak a lot about this. In fact, we should have an event about this next time.
This is great. I'm like keeping track of topics. We can list that.
Yep.
I think this is something that startups sometimes struggle with. Like large organizations have big budgets and professional learning and courses you can take, and here's your O'Reilly account, so you can read books, and they see that as a way of getting talent. Startups don't have all those formalities in place. They do have things like hackathons, which are a great way to actually both help people learn new skills while at the same time creating new opportunities in the company. And hackathons are an awesome concept. But then on the other hand, startups also can sometimes have a lot of money thrown at them. So they're saying, oh yeah, sure, go to a conference, go. But when it comes down to time, it's hard because a small company only has a couple of designers. It's easy to throw money at it. It's harder to throw time at it because you don't have as much buffer as in big organizations. But yeah, it's great. Great question. How about the new normal? We got a couple people asked about designing in the new normal. Jane likes that question as well. So how is design changing for designers in this crazy world we're living in?
Well, we were just talking about that, Jim, actually in the backstage.
Right.
We were wondering if that question was going to come up, especially for designers that are in various different stages, starting, transition, mid-stage, and later in careers. So want me to go, Jody, Jim?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and share my perspective. Sure. I think, I currently work remotely. I've worked remotely for a while. And so I think that is a trend that, has just been rising in general. And I think that's definitely going to be one that continues. So in terms of skills around that, obviously it's a lot of video calls. We're all, getting used to that. But I think that the harder thing is, sometimes when we do workshops, transitioning that in-person meeting into a virtual meeting, I think that's going to be an invaluable skill moving forward.
I agree. I agree. Miro we've had a lot of fun with an application called Miro for online like whiteboarding and stuff like that. Yeah, it's funny, you know, at first everyone was like, can we make remote work? And then everyone said, oh yeah, hey, remote works. I think what a lot of people are finding is that blurring of the line between work and home gets really, really hard of like, when does the day begin and when does the day end? And that work-life balance is hard, especially for folks that have kids. I like to try to keep reminding myself we're incredibly privileged in that we can work remotely. And so that's, you know, fantastic as designers that we have that as an option usually. But it is different and strange. I know for Alex and I think we're not really planning on going back anytime soon as a company. And I think a lot of folks are in that. And, you know, folks that have kids, folks that, you know, are taking caregivers, it's incredibly challenging. So they're kind of being there for each other, I'd say, as much as possible.
Yeah, and I think, you know, both Jim and Jody have touched on this. I think one of the things to keep mindful of is that this is a level playing field for everyone now. Now, in the past, some folks who are working remotely that are maybe tethered into a larger organization and being the only one that's remote, and folks are in a conference room, they have their chatter, they have their FaceTime, they have a pre-water cooler, coffee, water, and so forth.
They forget to dial you in.
Right, they have to dial you in and say, can you hear me? I think of this as a new normal, as a new opportunity, not just for people to adjust to new work lifestyle, like kids at home, right? Education, schools, all that stuff. Like that's all the stuff that everyone's got to deal with now. I think more from a standpoint, even for UX or designers for that standpoint, this is a chance for us to really speak up. This is really a chance for us as designers to really bring value to the table, not just to the work that you're doing, but also to overall in terms of the product initiatives, the organization, the business, and so forth. I think this is a wonderful opportunity to look at that. So glass half full.
Yeah.
We had a question that I think would be good to touch on. It says, is becoming a design manager an inevitable future in one's career, or remaining an individual contributor is possible?
Yes. Yes.
That is a great question. And we were just talking about this the other day. I think a lot of it depends, right? Some organizations have career paths for contributors as well as managers. I think a lot of companies don't realize that managing and designing are not the same thing. It's a completely different skill set. And just because someone's a great designer or a great engineer or a great writer or a great any other role doesn't mean they're necessarily great managers. And that's tough. It's tough. It's like you think you're aspiring to this thing, and all of a sudden here's this thing, and you're in this role, and all of a sudden you realize, wait, this is nothing like what I was doing before. I don't think it has to be inevitable. I think knowing what you want to do and getting to know a company that you're talking to and understanding, that's a great question to ask, right? Is how do you, as an organization, how do you approach contributors versus managers? Is there a contributor track? Can I become a senior contributor, a principal contributor? Do I have to become a manager? Like understanding those things is really important before you join an organization, a big one or a small one.
Great suggestion, Jim. Yeah, and I would say and echo that. I think most of the more founded product companies understand and respect and value, right, the skill sets and hard skills that you provide. Many of them have a contributor track, which is actually a principal role. Those are highly, highly touted and highly, highly valued because if you think about these principals that could have 15, 20, 25 years of experience, whether it be in technology or design or UX specifically. Companies understand that. Like you can still contribute at a very high level, right, to the organization, to the product, to the experience that you're working on, not having to people manage. And I think successful companies find a way to really untap that talent in individuals to understand and respect the individuals wanting to go that route. And I think that's fantastic. And you should definitely, echoing Jim's thing, is to ask that question if that's the track you want to pursue.
Right, absolutely. Quick time check. It's almost 10 till, so we have time for a few more questions. And then we'll be transitioning to our backstage
Cool. Christine has a question. Thoughts from the group. Do you have any thoughts on what a healthy mix of senior and junior designers in a pure UX team or interdisciplinary product design team / department? So what would be a good healthy mix between your senior and junior designers? That's a good question.
Gosh, you're looking at me. Okay. I feel like some of this is all a cop out because I'm going to say it depends again, but it depends on, how big is the team? Yes. How mature is the product and engineering organization that you're working with? Are you actually not in-house? So I've worked in-house for a while, so my mind immediately goes there. Are you a consultancy where maybe more people are going to be a higher level senior than maybe you would have in-house, where you can sort of grow that junior level talent up a little bit more? And so I think it's taking a look at, that maturity across the organization and figuring out, what does the team need right now? Do you, as a leader, are you detached from your team most of the day? And so you really need that middle management tier to lead those junior designers. Jim, I don't know about thoughts you have there.
Yeah, it's I have a bunch of thoughts in my head. I mean, on the one hand, part of our job as leaders is always thinking about who are we training up, who takes over for us, right? You always want to, and that's true for a person above you and the person above them and so on. You're always thinking about how am I growing the organization and creating opportunities. And at the same time, depending on the company, there's just work that's got to be done. Like if everybody is so senior and so strategic and everyone's just sitting around hour after hour thinking strategically, it's like at some point you need folks to just kind of get great design work done. And so that's a great opportunity to say, hey, I'm going to bring in some really talented young designers who want to do great work. I've got senior people that I can delegate to because I don't want to be a micromanager. I don't want to be in every meeting. I want to create opportunities for them. Thinking about the work and the team and the needs of the organization, and then crafting the team around that. You got to keep in mind though that younger designers are they're not going to juggle as many things. They're not going to understand how to present and communicate the same way as more senior ones. So that's coaching opportunity for them to help them understand and grow.
Yeah, and I would say healthy mix. Yeah. It's a cop-out answer. Healthy mix is good. I think it really depends on the organizational support and also the demographic of the customers and the products you're supporting for, right? If you're going after the millennial clientele, I don't think you want 40, 50 someone designing the majority of your products. But with that said, I think it is really important and critical to support the younger generation of our new designers that are coming into the field. I had a start. I was fortunate to get a start. I worked my tail off to be able to get to where I am today. And certainly that took some time, right? 20 years in. But with that said, I think as an advice and the guidance to younger designers who come into the field, I think there was a few questions around how to get in and doing all that stuff. There was the notion of a lot of great advice that came through from the panel today. I think there's another part, which is the work ethics. Like work your butt off. Like work in the sense that you love and you breathe this field. And if you don't, this is probably not the field you want to be in, because if you're in this for money, there's probably a lot more better industries and a work life that you could probably do. Now, the work-life balance, you may have to sacrifice a little more. Not that we have a great work-life balance, but I would say go in and do just like what we're thinking about how to break into an industry is to really surround yourself with great people, learn from them, right? And have that healthy balance of understanding of what some of the great pioneers in this field have gone through, as well as your immediate networks of people that have their trials and tribulations and war stories and battle stories. And also learn from your peers, right? Not just from the seniors, but also from your same peers about what they're going through. And then you can glean and learn from how about really to kind of break into the field. And I think that goes in line with an organization of thinking about how you balance the junior and senior sort of balance.
Yeah. And I'll have at Virtru, when I built a team there were 4 product teams and they each needed a relatively senior designer. And so the structure of the teams kind of dictated the needs, but we were able to bring in an intern researcher who came in, and she was amazing. So there's other ways you can also bring junior people into an organization and create opportunities for them too. I'm seeing a question about accessibility, which is near and dear to my heart. They've actually patiently asked us a couple times about re-asking, have any of you made accessibility such a priority that it is tied to individual contributor performance evaluations?
I don't know that specific thing has ever been a moment in a performance evaluation. It is an expectation for my team. We don't put any design system components out without, they don't even get to the development team without being checked fully for accessibility. So it is sort of ingrained into our process. We part of that process is also doing keyboard navigation, writing labels so that they are consistent with the labeling that is there for a user who may be sighted. So I've built it into the process. We do have some folks that are going through more of a accessibility review. So that part would then be baked in. So the fact that they're going through and checking some of our products for accessibility so that they can give sort of a holistic report to a team. So that obviously is part of their performance review, but not for the general designers because it's just an expectation.
Yep. Normally it will either be at a product requirement level or a team requirement level. But like a recent job, training we all had to complete training. It was required. And so actually, yes, that was a part of you. Did you complete your training and sign off on that? So in that sense, it can be. I think it really depends on the has the organization made accessibility a requirement that trickles down to the individual responsibility. And that's, not all the organizations sign up for that. It is.
I would say that should be a shared responsibility across design and technology. Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah. Be mindful. We have about 4 minutes. We have break sessions afterwards. Love to share.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say, am I online? Yes, you can.
Yes, you are.
So I wanted to mention a few questions that you might want to take with you to the breakout session. One of them was, how have you used design ops approach to grow or start a team? Mm-hmm. Maybe make a note of that, the design ops. The other one was, when do you grow a team's ability to do more work by hiring an agency versus hiring contractors versus recruiting full-time? And I would love to understand better how to implement a good design system when coming on board into into a new project that is already established, but not consistent across the board. Oh, haven't we all been there? There isn't always collaboration or understanding of why a good design system is needed. My sort of 2 cents on that, just do it and don't call it a design system. And then all of a sudden, all people will be saying, oh my God, we're so much better now. Why? Well, we've been doing this on the side. One additional thing that I would sort of pop in, and maybe a quick thought on that from you. So you mentioned working hard. I fully agree, and I think that counts everywhere. And one of the other things is I would advise also to have a plan and have goals. And I do mean keep those, written up somewhere in a document or on a, spreadsheet or post-it or whatever, but keep it flexible. Return to it every now and again. Make sure, does this make sense still, or don't I like that goal, or does its goal still make sense? So what do you guys think around that sort of goal setting and sort of designing your own career kind of thing?
Yeah, I can speak really quickly to it. There's the idea of OKRs, and OKRs, the idea is they cascade from the business down to the area, down to the team. They kind of stop at team. I think it's really important to have individual kind of professional goals of what am I trying to do as I grow as a designer. I like to check in on those kind of quarterly and with one-on-ones with team members. And so, but their work ultimately ties back to the team that they're working directly with. So a designer that's embedded in a team, they're working towards OKRs, and their team reports back on those. So it's a nice way to kind of balance both the professional development and then the executing against the business objectives. What do you guys think? Agree?
100%. I saw Jody's lightning go off. Yeah, definitely keep notes. Keep notes about your progress, just like you would do with anything about things you really, really care about, right? baby tracking, pregnancy as one, your car, your growth of your garden, number of things, or hobbies or things that you're going after. You're brewing beer, right? So, I mean, keep notes, just as you would do with things you really care about. And career is something that you should really cherish for yourself. And I think that's definitely a huge note as you're thinking about, not just about your development, but also from a standpoint, like as you're working with the teams, working with your managers, you can also keep the organization, your team, your manager honest in terms of your progress. I think that's highly helpful in terms of hitting goals and growth that you want to go
to. It's about time for us to go to our breakout area, but I just want to say, everyone, thank you so much for a fantastic 100th event. Jody, Alex, thank you both so much. I really appreciate it. And
thank you, Peter and Jesse, too.
Yes, this has been
a pleasure. Thank you very much. And we are super happy to have helped you host the 100th in a somewhat special, under somewhat special circumstances.
Yeah, quite special. So quite amazing. Thanks, everybody. So we're gonna be moving to the our breakout session, and we're happy to take some more questions there.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we'll continue the questions in the session group.
Yeah. So thank you, sessions. Thank you all. Thank you, Jody, Alex, Jim. Great to have you. If you want to continue discussing around this topic, you can go to sessions and then there search out Washington, D.C., Washington, D.C., USA. Just click on that, and you can even join like this, talking and speaking, if Jim and the others will let you in. And that is all. So if you are just joining now, we are 24 hours of UX, and we still have a couple of hours to go. And we already have the next group lined up. So
bye, everyone.
Bye, guys. Thank you.